Professor Darryl, President, American University of Sovereign Nations, and the second presenter, Professor Shamina Lashwal. So now I would request Professor Darryl to give his presentation on boundaries of bioethics and academic integrity. Professor Darryl, please.
Thank you very much. Okay, well, good morning and thank you very much. It's my great pleasure to be here. I want to talk about applying research ethics and integrity and how we should approach ethics as a scientist and as a thinker. So I want to firstly introduce some of my ontology, my history. I'm a social construct, living and working with others in Christchurch, Aotearoa, New Zealand, where I grew up. Then I went to study molecular biology and biochemistry in Cambridge, in the UK. And then I also transferred over to bioethics as my major discipline after my PhD. I worked then, shortly back in New Zealand, for the government as we were discussing the ethical issues of biotechnology, topics such as the use of genetic engineering and what the country's policy should be towards the application of genetic engineering technology to the agricultural industry in New Zealand. Also a series of public consultations. For much of the next 15 years, I was a foreign professor in Tsukuba Science City in the University of Tsukuba in Japan. So that was my very, I guess, significant time to teach, and we developed the first master's and PhD programs in Japan on bioethics. And I was the first person employed in Japan by National University to teach bioethics. So I was a foreigner, but I was actually employed as a Japanese. Do I look Japanese to you? But actually, I'm more Japanese than many Japanese. So then I also spent some useful time in Rome, in Italy, to set up an ethics program in the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. So the application of ethics to agriculture, environment, and food. I also learned something about my ontology there. I learned about my roots because I didn't know before I went there. My name, Mesa, is a name also found in Italy, and it's actually a name of Rome. If you've heard of Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, these are two emperors of Rome that had a dispute. Mark Antony was inherited from Julius Caesar after the execution. The last coin of Julius Caesar at the back of a coin, M-A-C-E-R, Mesa. Mesa was a treasurer of Rome. He could put his name on a coin. And the first three coins of Mark Antony had the name Mesa on them as well. So it was very interesting for my discovery. I found that one of my relatives was the governor of Africa under Emperor Nero, another Mesa. Unfortunately for him, I don't think I'm a descendant of his because when Emperor Nero died, this governor of Africa refused to recognize the new emperor in Rome, and they dispatched a Roman legion to Africa and dealt with him. So that's interesting. I didn't know I was Italian. But actually it wasn't Italy, it wasn't known then, it was Rome. Then I moved to work for UNESCO, United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, I had worked on committees, the International Bioethics Committee for some time, to set up guidelines for the international declarations on the human genome and human rights, and other issues, including global regulations on biotechnology and food, and population genetics, and these types of quite interesting and controversial issues. However, the chance to work for UNESCO was interesting. My role as regional advisor was to advise governments in Asia Pacific, and I had the great fortune to meet dear friends in different countries and try and build my passion, which was to establish bioethics in every country in the world. And we could work with Professor Shamim Alaska and Professor Taslima Monso and others to build up a healthy bioethics community in Bangladesh and India and Malaysia and other countries around the world. So that was useful. It also gave me a chance to reflect on the role that we have in public service for trying to get people to think. The systems of knowledge production are critical. How do I make an empowered future for people? If our education system doesn't allow that. Did all of you go to school?
Yes.
Sorry if it sounds rude, but some people I know did not go to school. I was the first person in my family to go to university. And so, in my home country, Aotearoa, New Zealand, it was an egalitarian society. To some degree it still is. It allowed people from every background to go to school. It was interesting because for me, I'd love to learn, but I must admit, as a high school student, I enjoyed my study. It didn't seem like a problem, but I played tennis 2 or 3 hours every day after school. I played sports. I saw my friends. We played all sorts of games. And then when it came to exams, I just did the exams, did okay, and well, actually did quite well. And so that was interesting. So I was very fortunate that for some reason I was given the opportunity to love to learn. But many people are not. And I think also having people that allowed me, my parents allowed me we went to nature every weekend to go fishing, to go looking at birds, to go looking, and my mother was an artist, to look at scenery, to think about the picture and representation and images. This is a part of our history. It builds us up. So that's part of my origins of bioethics, is the love of life. So when I reflect then on education systems that push people in the name of a right to education, they push them to go to school and study exams and work so hard in an obsessive parental involvement. They're not tiger mums. These are giant monster mums and dads who are pushing their kids. And maybe some of you parents now thinking, maybe what am I doing? But is this the right way? I don't think it is. So in the reform of education systems, to be creative, this is part of the enterprise of bioethics, because bioethics then is thinking about our future. And unless everyone has a bioethics education, we will not be protecting ourselves from the people in power. The medical doctors, the teachers, the scientists, the politicians, the business people. Everyone will be exploited. So education is the only method to empower people to do this. And 5 years ago, I did something which I never, ever believed I would do. I moved to the United States of America. But I moved to Native American land to establish a university there. And I felt immediately at home. I also, part of my ontology and part of my essence is from another 60 countries around the world where I've spent some time. I'm sorry I've only spent maybe 2 or 3 weeks of my short life in Bangladesh. That's part of me as well. And each place I go every day, I learn something. In our session today, I learned something, and we learn together in active learning from each other. So this has affected my ontology, and from that, I say thanks to everyone. So I want to talk about bioethics. New technology has been a catalyst for re-examination of medical ethics and social ethics and international dialogue on ethical principles. I mean that we had social ethics for millennia. It took new technology for us to go back to our roots and think, what does it mean for genetic privacy? It means privacy for each other. If somebody's going to the bathroom, you don't need to ask them. If somebody has a family issue, they got divorced, you don't need to ask them. If somebody has children and they're not doing very well, you don't need to invade their privacy. Unfortunately, I think many societies confuse the friendliness with invasion of privacy question. Okay? So that's interesting. For my friends, I usually share anything in a direct conversation, but certain topics I will probably not discuss at all because it's the privacy of people. As a professor, privacy is one of the most important things because people say everything to me and I need to respect their privacy. As a friend, it's the same. And I think that's one of the interesting ethical things I've seen in your society is the discussion about people, even discussion about people behind their back, which is, I think, not always a good thing, usually not. So we have medical ethics, dental ethics, environmental ethics, public health ethics, applied ethics, ethics of biotechnology, applications of social ethics. How do we do this? The descriptive ethics is the way that people view life, their moral interactions and responsibilities with living organisms in their life. I have my bioethic and you have yours. My students study bioethics in different contexts. That's what we do. They might use philosophy, sociology, anthropology, biology, but they study. And I try to do this descriptive ethics. The second way to view ethics is prescriptive ethics. Is to tell others what's ethically good or bad, or what principles are most important in making such decisions. It may also be to say that something or someone has rights and others have duties to them. So this is what's right and wrong. Do we need to tell other people? Well, maybe we tell our children, don't touch the stove, you're going to burn your hand. Don't kill somebody because you should respect or love their life. But some of the principles of ethics, for example, in colonialism, where somebody says their ethics are more important or better than somebody else's ethics, this is wrong. I might say some things like I respect everyone's opinion, but I still might state that I'm against capital punishment, for example. So we have international standards of bioethics. We have 3, which have been agreed by all countries in the world. So for those of you who, this is an introduction to bioethics, there are 3 standards agreed by all countries as frameworks for application of bioethics. And the last one, the 2005 Universal Declaration of Bioethics and Human Rights, is the only, or kind of the closest thing we have to a universal ethic. There are about 15 principles of bioethics, and these are outlined here. So we talked about consent, privacy, cultural diversity. Everyone needs to think about these principles. I have the water, thank you. Bioethics is a love of life. my name is Darryl Mesa. I am a Homo sapien. Yes? How many other species are in my body now? Do you know? I share with all of you 17 universal microorganisms that are found in every human being. 17. They're common. All of us have around 100. Thank you, Shirley. Thank you. So we have 100 microorganisms living in our body, but at least 17 were found out ubiquitous. Everybody has them. So next time we say, I'm Homo sapien, okay, yes, you're Homo sapien, but more cells in your body are microorganisms than Homo sapien. Not just in your gut, in intercellular spaces, in your arms and legs and your brain. Interesting. And microbiome. So I have a bit of a cough. Some of my microorganisms are not happy with the current situation. And probably we have some invaders in our body. So in our body, we're trying to fight that off. Because we don't want unwelcome guests. But so protection of the environment, biosphere, and biodiversity, you think just applies to trees and forests and coral reefs. Well, I'm an ecosystem as well. A third way to view bioethics is something which I think you may be a little more familiar with now than you were yesterday. Interactive ethics is discussion and debate between people, groups within society, and communities. Such dialogue skills are necessary to live harmoniously with others. So, for example, we have different opinions. What's love? What's respect? If you follow the news, we have interactive ethics on the streets in Dhaka. Yes? That is interactive ethics. It's a healthy society. If you have interactive ethics, it may not be so healthy if it's not given a chance to be expressed in an organized manner. Maybe we need a more healthy bioethics to have an organized manner for interaction and reform and less structured paternalism. But this is a dialogue. We need to live harmoniously. Bioethics sometimes causes a major issue. If you know your news, yesterday in Argentina, large civil protests about the reform of the abortion law. It passed the lower house, that the Senate is more conservative, which means more Catholic, and they may be opposed. But eventually it will change. Ireland had this debate a few months ago. So these are questions that were discussed for at least 3,000 years of literature that we know about, and more. These are bioethics questions. So bioethics is not new. We need to interact with the law and decide. The activity of science is not ethically neutral. Scientists are human beings. Science is based on assumptions such as the falsifiability hypothesis or some enlightenment mentality that modern science is better than traditional wisdom and practices that are driven by religious and political ideals. Now, I don't say that I believe in enlightenment mentality, but it was actually the views of this enlightenment, in quotation marks, that modern science is somehow better than traditional views that led to the colonization of the world. So when the Spanish came to Mexico City 600 years ago, they found a city of 1 million people with a sewage system, a cleaning system, water distribution system. It was the actually most advanced city that they knew at the time. I won't say the world because at least it was more advanced than the European cities. Yet they were colonizing it. Sort of strange, isn't it? Falsifiability hypothesis. In science, we have a practice that unless you can propose a theory that can be falsified, it's not valid science. This is useful for the distinction of what is science. The question, however, of religious and political ideals is a very serious topic. We have some alumni from AUSN who are refugees from your country because of books they wrote. They're under the protection of foreign security services. Okay? So one of their alumni lost his friends, his co-authors already. He's still in regular touch, but he's in another country. He can't stay in his house for more than a few months. He has to move from house to house, even in a different country, because of religious fundamentalism and the lack of ethical discussion that happens in different places. So, but if we have respect knowledge, then all types of knowledge are part of this knowledge development. So government should be supporting knowledge. Academics, civil society, we are co-producers of knowledge. Okay? And this knowledge has many forms. So we talk about a policy nexus. A nexus is a Greek word for a meeting space. This is a forum or nexus. A nexus is like this, between researchers, policymakers, and civil society. We promote what is, promoting empirical research. We promote what could be, promoting philosophical reflection of future-oriented studies. 3, we determine what should be, developing and promoting international standards. And 4, discussion what we think, creating a policy nexus and implementation of all stakeholders. In order to implement recommendations and policies into action. If we don't put our policy and law into action, it is just a paper. So what do we do well? Well, descriptive ethics is what is, so maybe empirical research is supported. Future reflection studies, what could be? Do we do that well? Some of you are my students. You can do study on what is, but you can also do study on what could be, and we need more of it. So the questions like, what methodology is this? Is this what's your independent variables and what's your dependent variables? That's like empirical research, but we also need to think what could be and what should be. And then what do we think together? So you could also do your PhD on creating a nexus for what should be. You could create a forum to discuss what we should do together, what we think. That could be your PhD. That's interactive bioethics methodology. So these are methods. Now, the neutrality of science is interesting as well. We're in the National Heart Foundation. So most of the research grants and the funding is based on the idea, we have one of the directors here, maybe to say that we're going to cure heart disease, or we're going to lower the impact of heart disease. When I was doing biochemistry and molecular biology research, the research is usually funded by some promise, we will cure cancer. Well, sadly we still have cancer. But of course we're getting better at it, but it's a long time to do this. We're going to help our response to climate change, another good excuse for grants. We're going to make life better. Is that right? In bioethics, that's what we do. Give us money, we can make life better for you. Well, the integrity of science is to say, well, we may make these goals that we may not be able to deliver the results of these great promises that we make. However, going back to the earlier slide, making the future that we want is a critical part. So unless you have a dream, you cannot reach it. Okay? So we may say this is a false hope, that it's not really, it's our hope, it's the real hope. it may be difficult to achieve, but unless we try, we're not going to. So bioethics is not just thinking about some moral guidance on human experimentation and other activities. It's also reforming our future. So that let's work with scientists and doctors and engineers and environmentalists and students on the streets and say, put your energy into making the future better, constructively. So that's what we're trying, I think, to do. One of my primary goals is social development. The first article of the International Covenant on Economic and Social Rights and Civil and Political Rights is the same word. All peoples have a right to self-determination. By virtue of that right, they freely determine their political status and freely pursue their economic, social, cultural development. So I may say bioethics is love of life, because I think people understand that better than this article. Because we had this article for 70 years, and many people do not have self-determination. But that's, bioethics is love of life is a translation of this. Okay. All peoples. Is that a spelling mistake? Why do you have an extra S after people? What's the difference between people and peoples? So when I take the selfie, for example, I have two people in my selfie right now, madam. However, all peoples, I can take a photo of all peoples here from this position. So then, each people in the world, each community, there are 4,000 or 5,000 peoples in the world. How many peoples in Bangladesh? It's an interesting question. There are many. They have the right to self-determination. But where? Then we have questions of politics. For example, your dear neighbor is Myanmar. They recognize 135 ethnic groups, but there are two in particular they do not recognize. One is the Rohingya, and one are Chinese Burmese. They say these are not Burmese. Okay? So, okay, they say they may be people, but we don't recognize they're not our people. So whose people are they? So there are dangers when you exclude or include different ethnic groups. If nobody wants your people, to be frank, so what are you going to do with them? So self-determination is critical. My goals include eubias, which is good life for all creatures. So this word eubias means good life in Greek. You have heard about euthanasia, it means good death. Okay? So good death may be important, but good genes, eugenics. But I hope that you agree that eubias is more positive. We should be concerned about our life. Life includes good birth and death as well. My goal is also for a bioethically mature society. How do we form a mature society full of well-informed and balanced persons? Bioethically mature means a person or a society that can balance the benefits and risks of alternative options. They can make well-considered decisions and they can talk about it. So in our society, there are some issues of bioethics which no one will ever agree totally on. Euthanasia. You will never have a society where 100% of people agree. Abortion. You will never have a society where 100% of people agree. These are questions of consensus. So how do we develop that? Maturity is to talk about it, civilized, and tolerate what we allow. So I talked about what is bioethics. My approach to bioethics in 2002, I proposed something called the Human Behavior Project, or the Mental Mapping Project. The idea is that, and then I published in the journal Nature, so the human genome has largely been sequenced, and work continues to the proteome and transcriptome. Now, how do we map the behaviorome? The idea of the behaviorome is that we will map all the ideas that are used in making decisions. I have a picture of your head, all the ideas that you use. So what are you thinking right now? I imagine that if we map the people in this room, if I ask them a bioethics question, they're thinking of a certain number, but it's finite. Total number of ideas in the room, maybe 50. If there's a complex issue with a large number of people, you might manage to get 100 different ideas. But many of these are common ideas we mix together. So this is then a question of how we can study our response. So bioethics is about this response. So we have a situation. The situation creates a moral dilemma. Then we have different ideas feeding into our choices and making a decision. So the mental mapping is, how do we map the ideas? And I used interviews or questionnaires or different ways to look at ideas. How do these affect? And how do we measure different cultures, different ages, different times in our education about these different issues? The theme of this session, there's one to hand also, slides too, that's good, right? Okay, so in the Universal Declaration on the Human Genome and Human Rights, there is an Article 13 which talks about some activities, and I want to know if you agree that these are part of your professional duties. The activities of researchers include meticulousness, caution, intellectual honesty and integrity in carrying out their research, as well as in the presentation and utilization of the findings. There should be a particular attention in the framework of research on the human genome, because that was the context of the declaration. So in our committee, as we developed the declaration, we considered what are the common elements that make a scientist, and these are key words. So are you meticulous?
Yes.
Tell me, are you meticulous?
Yes.
Okay, who was here at 9:00 this morning? At 9 a.m. Not many people, actually. So meticulousness was not a very good virtue today. Caution. Are you cautious?
Yes, that's why little.
Okay, so if I walk like this, I'm cautious, and then, oh, I'm cautious. But actually, if we do our dancing on the stage, maybe it's uncautious. If I'm half off the edge, I'm becoming less cautious. Yes? I could break my leg. And some people do. So the caution is important. Okay, I used to do, I did my PhD in a wonderful laboratory. And when I went to Japan, people asked me, why don't you continue doing biochemistry research? And I said, if I wanted to do biochemistry research, I would have stayed in the laboratory that I was. We had 7 Nobel Prize winners in our laboratory working. We had anything that we wanted was in the shop. This is not a 7-Eleven shop. It was actually closed in the night. But you could buy, you could get anything, actually for free. It all came from research grants. Any enzyme, any radioisotopes, anything you needed was there already. Rare things you had to order. It took a day to get from London. So that was great. Caution. Well, we loved our laboratory so much that my supervisor and colleagues, we would do our experiments in the morning, and we always stopped at 12:00 to open our sandwiches and put it on the bench, move the radioisotopes to the side, the enzymes in the DNA to the side, was a biohazard and radioisotope lab, and eat our sandwiches and listen to BBC Radio 4 political commentary and discuss that, and then we might get to cricket eventually because it's Britain, you know, and the weather. The weather was, you could see out the window. Caution, well, you might say it's not cautious because it's a biohazard lab, a radioisotope lab, and people are, you know, this guy is getting a Nobel Prize because research, isn't it going to contaminate the experiment? Well, not really. We didn't eat in the cell culture room. We ate in the lab, normal lab. But nowadays people are very cautious. Maybe your standards, you get in trouble if I do that. I get in trouble with this on video and I say, I don't recommend it. But I say that it led to a very interesting culture. But I still, if I'm dealing with a smallpox virus, I'm not going to take it in my lunchbox back home. Or polio virus, I'm not going to take it outside. We keep that in a particular place. Caution. Honesty and integrity, these were more challenging issues because they were not always followed in competitive science. Fortunately, they should be. I'm going to go on to some themes of knowledge. So the practice of meticulousness, caution, and honesty. What do we see here? This, if you're on the stage, you can read the writing. Would you like to read it? It's Japanese. It says the tsunami came, big wave came, many people died, so do not build below the stone. Don't build below the stone, it's on the side of a hill. So what happens? It's traditional knowledge is open data. It tells people in this valley, the tsunami came, it means it's probably going to come again. The water came up to here, so don't build below the stone. Because when the tsunami comes, your house will be gone. And in northeastern Japan, every 60 to 80 years, there's a 15-meter tsunami in many of these valleys. 15 meters is quite high. Yeah. A lot of Dhaka is maybe not that high. So, what do people do? Despite the meticulousness and caution of their colleagues who spent the time to make a stone and warn people, after 10 years, people get lazy and they think, it's so hilly in Japan. It's difficult to build a house on a hill. Let's go down to the flat by the ocean and we're going to live there. They rebuild and then tsunami comes, trying to build another stone, bury more people. We actually don't bury them, they usually get washed out to sea. So this is the question of public health. This is also science. So do you use a photocopy machine? Anybody?
Yes.
Actually, in the countries I've worked in, I have a PhD, at least one, in photocopying, because I love copying papers. Now we scan, so we have to scan, and we have the magical telephone, which I was last month in Cambridge University Library for almost 2 weeks. I took around 20,000 photographs of books that I wanted to take. If I had this when I was a student, it was wonderful. It's free. Of course, you have to buy a phone, and I have to plug it into a hard drive, and I can read so many books. Wonderful. So we don't need photocopy machines so much, we're still in the office, but what's different about this photocopy machine? Do you have one of these? Some people in a wheelchair use your photocopy machines? Usually not. But in this place, Shminda's been here, this is in a place where many of the staff in this facility are of different abilities. So you need to make your workplaces accessible. Bioethics and cloning. We have international regulations. This is a report I wrote looking at the failure of the United Nations system in the regulation of human cloning. If you're interested, we can talk. But it's what are the options? Human cloning is actually the only prohibition against it is really international customary law, which Professor Monceau knows very well. But the UN failed to get a declaration or convention on this topic, even though it could have. And it was because of various interesting issues, the confusion over stem cell research and the ethical view that some people have that using human embryos to create human stem cells to do research on therapeutic uses was unethical. And some people believe that still today, and some countries believed it. At the time, the United States of America believed it, so a few other countries. So you have a declaration where major countries of the world promoting research disagree with the declaration, and major countries who have a religious government at the time had a different view, so it's a failure. Another example of research, a haplotype map. This is one of the genetics tools. How do you get the sample to make a haplotype map? Well, we get samples from different populations around the world and we make a repository. But who gives consent? So I was responsible for gathering the community engagement and informed consent for people in Japan to represent a Japanese sample in the global repository. And so there is, but we got the meetings and consensus from Japan to say, yes, Japanese people accept to be represented and accessible so people can take genome samples and they can say this is a Japanese sample, this is a Han Chinese sample, this is a Yoruban sample from Nigeria. Different communities gave community consent. Some indigenous communities do not consent. Some Native American tribes, some tribes in different countries say, we do not give consent. So you should not be collecting a DNA. And they're not on the map, because that's their decision. This is self-determination. So it affects science in this regard. I'm going to talk, we have other issues of bioethics and social agendas. Let's get thinner, common core. Let's get taller. Yeah. We talk about human rights abuses. Okay, so let's traffic some young girls and give them growth hormone so they can grow more quickly to be in a sex trade. Yeah, this happens in your country, it happens in different countries around the world. It happens in America. So you traffic little girls and you give them growth hormone. Okay? This is it's an understatement to say it's unethical. Yeah? So these are bioethics issues that we have, social action to try. Let's get whiter. I talked about this. Whitening cream. Everyone's using it. I didn't put my cosmetics on today, sorry, because guess what? I'm white enough. But if I'm in the sun, I get pink, like a beetroot in fact. So I don't get tan. Funny thing is, many white-skinned people want to get tan, and many Asian people and African people want to get white. It's crazy, because beauty is not about skin. Many people say they want to get rich. Yeah, this is also an ethical dilemma. We have nutritious food. Do you eat tomatoes, or you put tomatoes on your skin? Do you use tomatoes on your skin? No. Usually only by accident. We have delicious tomato. Okay, but next time you spill a tomato on your skin, you're saving yourself money. You could be spending a lot of money on the whitening emulsion from tomato, but just be a messy eater. In summary, about some conclusions of integrity of science, and Shamina is going to talk about this further. Do not plagiarize. What is plagiarism? It's copying from somebody else without acknowledging. Okay? Do not invent results. Okay? Some of you need to get the results done. Did anybody do a chemistry class in high school or university? And when you did the graph, didn't get the right data point, did your teacher say, stay late and do the experiment again? Or they said, go use the results from the next group because we can't afford to use more chemicals. Or they might have said, well, it must have been a fly in the test tube, so just ignore that result. Because your results should be straight to get the mark. And if you get a grade for your laboratory experiment, your temptation is, of course, to make sure it's always straight. The trick, of course, is you give the students in the experiment with the real answer line shouldn't be straight. It should be a curve. And then you see how many do the experiment and they get a straight line. But I'm quite mischievous, you see. So I would do this in the bioethics class, and I would give people the experiment and say, you can get a straight line? Please think about your results carefully. So they all go back and they come back, oh, these are the results, we made a mistake. It's all straight lines. Oh, okay. It's not meant to be straight. There you go. So let people think and be creative. Some of you have written papers in journals. Okay, so I've written a few hundred papers in journals, and how many of these papers can be reproduced by other people? Statistically, about half of them. Natural science and social science are both about the same. It's sort of strange, isn't it? Academic paper chase is crazy to make papers, and then half of them can't be replicated. It's sometimes a lack of meticulousness, and sometimes the meticulousness should be in the writing to exactly describe everything to reproduce. But sometimes life is just interesting. So, most important about integrity, I think, is never to forget to ask questions. So I'm going to leave you with a website where you can get more information, and also where you can share information. I'd like to thank you very much for your patience with me and for learning together about bioethics. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Darryl. So thank you for explaining bioethics, boundaries of bioethics and academic integrity, and explaining it in a very good manner, and your teaching style really makes us understandable that what you were telling about bioethics, and which is really, we truly appreciate. Thank you very much. So if we have any question to Professor Darryl on bioethics or boundary of bioethics, then you can ask. So we have a very few minutes. So if from our audience side, if you have any question, so you can ask. Because before it starts his presentation, so we had a very good discussion in academic style. So I'm sure that you do not have, but although if you have any question on that issue, so you can ask. So if I do not get any question from audience, but I have one question. Okay, Professor Darryl. Can you please explain that how, because this is a new issue, although it is an old issue in academic arena, but to some extent in our practice that it is new issue in Bangladesh, I must say. And so my question is that how can we popularize this issue in Bangladesh? In academic arena, or in policy making, or in government level?
Well, Bangladesh already agreed to all the declarations on bioethics which state from the UN they agreed to establish national law to include bioethics at all levels of education. That is not yet done too well. So that's why we have Bioethics Society. The task of everybody is to educate with their friends, their students, their colleagues, and through that we can try only through education. We have forums, and I think eventually we need to reform the education system to spend time to think about our choices rather than memorizing lots of stuff which you don't need to remember. You see, if your internet is open, then you can use your little device for more than taking photographs. You can use it for actually researching. Interesting question of education. International schools and education in many countries let primary school kids take their computer and their smartphone to the classroom and use it for research. But in some countries, teachers don't allow that. In the case I know, my family, living in Thailand, they use computers all their school life from primary through secondary. Take computers to classroom, use internet in the classroom because you're learning. Come to California, meant to be the land of internet, don't bring your computer to school. You're not using the computer in the classroom, you're using a pen and paper. Sort of strange. To me it's looking at very paternalistically, but of course the school was thinking, well, kids have to do their exam by pen and paper, so they need to remember. And for some reason they think the teaching is not good enough to keep the students' attention on that, which I think is also a fault of the teacher. So, enhancing, there's no reason that students need to remember textbooks. The textbooks on the internet. So think about bioethics, this is the way. Thank you.
Many thanks, thank you. Thanks again for your nice presentation and everything.
Let's give a break for tea.